People are actually watching this. Did you know that?
I did not.
That's awesome.
No, Nikki said, yeah, I've been watching them. Okay. And she's been sending them to her friends.
Hmm.
So there's 4 people watching. Worth all the effort, I guess. We're moving into the part on apologetics where we're going to move into arguments for God, which is what people usually think of when they think of apologetics. What is a reasonable case for God? But before we do that, we probably ought to open in prayer. And so, Matt, would you open us, please?
God, we thank you for this day that we can come and meet together. We ask that you bless our time and help us to gain something from this lesson that we can use to help defend our faith when necessary. And stress. All this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Now, that was an affirming prayer. Can we get at least something? That's it that we might use if we ever have to defend our faith. Okay, Matt, just to see you're fully on board here. We're going to look at St. Anselm's ontological argument, which I'm going to define, but we dadgummit. I'll do it like that. I don't need to see you guys. Let's try that again. Those things always right where you need. Yeah, so anyway, this is natural theology is what we're actually talking about, which is it's the branch of theology that wants to look for evidence or revelation of God that's not revelation. It's not God giving a word. It's looking at the world. I mean, I give a technical definition. Say, oh, what sort of being would do this sort of approach? Because you look at the world and go, oh, it's pretty nice. You know, oh, plague. What sort of God is this? This is natural theology. And it's made a comeback. This is a quote from 2001, it's not that long ago. Would you read that out loud for me, Nance?
Naturalists passively watched as realist versions of theism, most influenced by
Planigant.
Planinga's writings, began to sweep through the philosophical community. Until today, perhaps 1/4 or 1/3 of philosophy professors are theists, with more being Orthodox Christians. Theists in other fields tend to compartmentalize their theistic beliefs from their scholarly work. They rarely assume and never argue for theism in their scholarly work. If they did, they would be committing academic suicide, or more exactly, their articles would be quickly rejected. But in philosophy, it became almost overnight academically respectable to argue for theism, making philosophy a favored field of entry for the most intelligent and talented theists entering academia today.
Now, 2001 is not that long ago. Interestingly, it's also the year of 9/11. The biggest, and we're going to go into this in later lessons in more detail. The biggest boom, I like boom. The biggest boom for the idea that God might exist outside of religious circles was the Big Bang Theory. Because with the Big Bang, then the world had a beginning. And believe it or not, they assumed the universe had always been here up until the 20s and 30s. And then that whole, we're going to go into detail on it. The idea that the universe, if the universe has a beginning, then it's got to have a creator. That's just the bottom line. And then what we've seen, and so that brought this back. And people went, oh, wow, maybe there's a God. Then, of course, the academic intellectual gymnastics people do to avoid that conclusion. That's going to become very evident over the next weeks as we look at this. It's It's startling. But nevertheless, this is what we're talking about, natural theology. It's, if you look at the world, well, what does the Bible say? A fool says in his heart, there's no God. What's Romans 1? You're without excuse. The world itself screams God. And physicists and biologists, natural sciences are pointed that way, most explicitly in philosophy, because they can actually do it, but scientists can't. What do you mean? We'll see. Now, but 9/11, something happened. The Brooke, you haven't used the crock pot yet, have you? Where's Keegan at church? Yeah. I hope you had fun. That is the only wedding shower I've ever been to, and more than likely the last one. Your dad and I just stood over there and talked. Said, "Not a whole lot of guys here." No, they usually don't. Okay. Though I called Marianne, she was just laughing that I'd come. Apparently it's the new thing for your age people, for guys to come to wedding showers and stuff. So I said, I don't even remember ours. I didn't go to the baby shower either. So it was interesting. 9/11 kicked this thing in the gut because of the religious extremists attacking us, that they're Muslims immaterial, because this put new verve in the step of the atheist. See, religion is bad. And that's where Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, I've never heard of Daniel Dennett, but Dawkins and Harris I've heard of, the new atheists. This is where they get, they just went to town. Religion's not good. And they started reasserting their arguments with more verve. So you couple that with the Big Bang theories. Look, Stephen Hawking, as you know, wrote The Beginning of Time, and he and Robert Penrose proved that time was a function of our universe and came into existence with the Big Bang, and that the universe had a beginning. And Hawkins made it clear, I didn't like that conclusion. So he spent the rest of his career coming up with workarounds. He's dead now, but they just know they don't like that because they don't want a creator. What's my saying? Go ahead, Matt. Everybody wants to sleep with their secretary. It's mind-boggling. Or if you don't like that, just a 2-year-old stamping his foot. You're not the boss. People don't like that. All right. This rebirth, because so now the world, academic world and the intellectual world is divided. Those for God and those against. And the Big Bang theory, there's no getting around that. If the universe has a beginning, there's a creator. And that is extremely troubling. So what are the traditional arguments? That's one of them. If it's got a beginning, if it's a created thing, it has a creator. And the atheists have been doing their own research. So you got this crescendo of arguments confronting each other. And we're going to go through them. That's the world that we live in. So what are the traditional arguments for theism? The ontological argument, which we're going to look at today, argues for the existence of God from the very concept of God. If he is ontology is the study of being, then he must exist. We're going to go in that one. The cosmological argument, which is the one that I've been saying, if the universe has a beginning, then it has to have a creator. Something exists, therefore must be first. I can quit doing that. I have it on my slide. The teleological argument is the design argument. How can the human eye work? That's just so fascinating. The obvious design, fine tuning is another version of this. And we'll be talking about that at some point. And the moral argument. Where do we get our values? Why do we say killing is wrong? So we're going to the ontological argument now. And it's deceptively simple. as you'll see. As I said, ontology is a study of being. Ontos is the Greek participle for to be. So being, that's how you translate a participle, being. And the main guy on this is Saint Anselm of Canterbury. He's a Benedictine monk. He became Bishop of Canterbury. You see his dates. And he came up with this argument. What's the argument? Well, now we're going to watch a short video. It's 5 minutes long, and then we'll talk about it, okay? So escape, and I go to my prepared video. See how I did? Yeah, yeah. You guys are watching golf. I'm on my table doing this. I hope you can hear this. Why is it not coming through?
In the year 1070, a monk named Anselm of Canterbury astonished the world by arguing that if it is even possible that God exists, then it follows logically that God does exist. Anselm's argument came to be called the Ontological Argument, and it has sharply divided philosophers ever since. The 19th century German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer called it a charming joke. But many prominent 20th century philosophers, such as Charles Alvin Planigant.
Can we not make it any louder? Do we have it up?
All the way up.
Yes.
Doesn't sound like it's as loud as it should be though.
Do we have the slides down there? As loud as they should go.
That's the microphone.
Remember, output volume is maxed. Okay. So it's as low as it sounds to me.
Yeah, it's soft.
What?
On the far right, the CC at the bottom right.
Okay, we'll do that. I was so ready.
Think that it sounds. Here it is. God can be defined as a maximally great being. If something were greater than God, then that being would be God. And in order to be maximally great, a maximally great being would have to be all powerful, all knowing, and morally perfect in every possible world. Possible worlds are simply ways the world could have been. To say that something exists in a possible world is just to say that if the world were that way, then the thing would have existed. For example, even though unicorns don't exist in the actual world, it seems at least possible that they could have. So we can say that unicorns exist in some possible world. On the other hand, a married bachelor does not exist in any possible world because the idea of a married bachelor is logically incoherent. It could not possibly exist. So if it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then we can say that he exists in some possible world. A maximally great being would not really be maximally great if it existed in only some possible worlds. To be maximally great, it has to be all-powerful, and morally perfect in every possible world. So think about it. If a maximally great being exists in any possible, then it exists in every possible world. And if it exists in every possible world, it exists in the actual world. That is, a maximally great being actually exists. Thus, the atheist has to maintain not simply that God does not exist, but that it is impossible that God exists. Here's a summary of the ontological argument. Steps 2 through 6 are straightforward and largely uncontroversial. What about point number 1? Clearly, if it can be shown that the idea of a God is logically incoherent, then the argument fails. But is the idea of a maximally great being absurd, like a married bachelor, or a square circle, or the smell of blue? This doesn't seem to be the case. The notion of an all-powerful, all-knowing, morally perfect being that exists in every possible world seems to be a perfectly coherent idea. But couldn't we parody this argument and make it work for anything? Why not say, it's logically possible that a maximally great pizza exists. Therefore, a maximally great pizza does exist. However, the idea of a maximally great pizza is not like the idea of a maximally great being. In the first place, there aren't intrinsic maximal values that make pizzas great. There could always be one more pepperoni to increase its greatness. It's not even obvious what properties make a pizza great. Thin crust or thick crust, extra cheese, anchovies. It's relative to the taste of the consumer. In the second place, a maximally great pizza would have to exist in every logical possible world. But that would mean that it couldn't be eaten. So it wouldn't really be a pizza, because a pizza is something you can eat. The idea of a maximally great pizza turns out not to be a coherent idea. The idea of God, on the other hand, is an intuitively coherent idea. Therefore, his existence is a possibility. And the ontological argument shows that if God possibly exists, then God actually exists.
Ta-da! So that's, in a nutshell, the ontological argument. We're going to go over a little more detail. Oh, it helps if I hit play. So what is the argument? God is the greatest conceivable being. That's the nature of it by definition. And if you come up with anything greater, that becomes God. So it's the greatest being. Since it's greater to exist than not to exist, in other words, it can't just be a mental exercise. God has to exist, not just in the mind, but in reality. That is the argument. Very simple, very unsatisfying, because your reaction probably, like mine was, that's too simple. Really? And so you come up, the actual, well, I'll show you. Ganilo of Marmoutier, it's a contemporary of Anselm, and he said his reaction was, oh, how cute. I doubt if and acute, whatever Latin for cute would be. He goes, you could use that to prove anything. This is the incredible pizza thing. But his was a perfect island. You could create, well, the perfect island must exist. Therefore, it does exist. And Anselm replied, look, you're being stupid. He wouldn't have said that. Foolish is what they would have said. No, it has to be, this only applies to things with necessary existence. They have to be. And that was a tricky concept to nail down, necessary existence, but that's essentially it. And a pizza doesn't have to exist. An island doesn't have to exist. So now, so what of this argument? We're done with that. It's actually making a resurgence. There are people that are arguing for it, and there are variations of it. So cleverly, we will look at those for a second. Did I hack you up, Julie? If I gotta listen to this crap, I'm gonna at least have a donut. So I'll go, the Wikipedia article is pretty good on this. Rene Descartes had a version of the argument, as in Cartesian planes, the X, Y, Z axis that we do. That's Rene Descartes, which is Leibniz, the inventor of calculus. He and Newton invented calculus at the same time. They're contemporaries. Wouldn't that be a heck of a notion? Look what I invented. Hey, so did I. When you can invent a math to solve a problem, you're in a whole new world. I actually stumbled across where Leibniz lived when I was in Munich. And that's the only reason it had a little plaque. Leibniz lived here. I went, huh. So I learned a little bit about it. Anyway, it's the same argument. They just give slightly different flavors to it. And then the big one is this guy, which is the name that she came up, Alvin Planigant. He's the current guy. He's alive. Everybody else is dead. And he has written extensively on this. The argument's, it's much more, he calls something modal. There it is, modal logic. And I didn't understand it, so I'm not gonna pretend, it wasn't in Hebrew, so I couldn't understand it. I did the best I could, y'all. But I'm just from South Georgia. We don't do modal logic. We barely do logic. So, and I find the argument unsatisfying, but I find it haunting that substantial minds give it credence. Now, part of what we're doing in here is there is no single argument that's going to prove God. I don't think, because like we said, if there was one, then every rational human being would believe in God, and that's clearly not the case. A lot of people want to stamp their foot. But you can build a cumulative case. Now, the universe having a beginning is a game changer. It really is. And so if we have to have a creator, then the ontological argument takes a little more heft. And you go, yeah, well, there has to be one, just by definition. That's interesting. And we're going to go into more detail in the others when we get to them. I am recording this, right? Yes. So, time for feedback. That's all it is. It's that simple. The other ones won't be so quickly to go through. We have to split them up over weeks and stuff. But what's your reaction to this? We have no reaction to this. What? My head hurts. Philosophy does that. Brooke, any reaction?
I took a class at TU taught by an atheist that was ancient philosophies and ignore this, and so it's bringing back memories of that. But I don't have any.
You don't remember anything he said about it?
Right, that was 2 years ago.
A lot's happened. I've got a wedding. Guess what? This is not uppermost in my tier of thinking. Anybody? Okay. Well, do you like the idea? Don't like the idea? So, okay, one more thing on the shelf. Okay.
I think it's interesting, but I don't think it has. It's an interesting play in the mind, but it doesn't really hold a lot, I think, in real life, if that makes sense.
No, that's the exact reaction. I just found it unsatisfactory. But the more you think about it, okay, because God is a different category of being, even just, even if he doesn't exist, it's a different category of being. So the pizza thing just doesn't work. The island thing, no, because he is a different category of being, what we're describing, if he exists. And so when you think about it, you just go, well, there's got to be a weakness, kink, 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 but you don't really see them. And Planigant is no idiot. And if he's going to stick for it now as we live, he's still alive, you got to go, there's more to it. When you read in this field, apologize. I just finished a book by Stephen Meyer called The Return of the God Hypothesis, just published it. He's the one that did a book called The Signature of the Cell. He's an intelligent design advocate. And big chunk of this book, he's arguing for cumulative arguments for the existence of God. He does talk about Anselm's argument. It's not pivotal, so he just kind of goes through it because of the reactions that we're having. The next one, the cosmological argument, is a little more substantial. It spends a lot of time on that. So it spends a lot of time on physics And there's two aspects of that. Did the universe have a beginning? Because if it did, that's pretty important. And second, which is that cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the fine tuning. When you look at the world, certain things have to be, if the speed of light were slightly different, life wouldn't exist. So why is it that way? Why can't it be whatever? And what he encounters over and over and over again. Oh, you're returning a drill. Is the reaction that says, no, we can't have a creator, and what people will go through to avoid that. And a big chunk of the book was just discussing these, especially, and they don't go at the philosophical argument per se, they go after the Big Bang. Well, does the universe really have a beginning? And so the difference between bubble universes, multiverses, I mean, multiverse is a serious argument. If you watch Big Bang Theory, it has no interaction with our universe. We have no way of proving it because there's no evidence for it. It's a theory. And he spends, this thick book, took me all week to read it. He spends a lot of time demonstrating that even the multiverse requires a beginning. So we'll talk about it when we get to it. But it's this idea of what people will go through to avoid having a creator. Which brings us back to last week. Do you really want to live in a world without a God? Well, when you want to eat, drink, be merry, yeah. But that gets old. Those of you that went through that phase in your life, you know that. At some point, you don't want another bar anymore. You don't want to wake up with another stranger. You don't want to, that's old. And so, do I really want to live in a universe without a God? Because then there's no significance. We all know there are stages in life, right? And when you get about 40 to your age, you guys are all in the 40s, maybe early 50s. Oh, shut up, Matt. What are you, 23? She's 23. Well, you're in the phase of life where you're establishing your career. And once you get that, the next stage is significance. You want your life to have mattered for something. And as we talked about last week, significance is something that's bestowed. It's not innate. If there's not another person to have a relationship, significance is meaningless. There is no significance. But if we all die, and we all do so far, then how can there be significance? There can only be significance if there's a person with whom we're in a relationship who doesn't die. And what do we call that person? Thank you, God. And God is what bestows significance. Because it doesn't matter. Tom Brady at some point is going to go, was it worth it? That's the fact that I'm the greatest quarterback in the history of the NFL. That's arguable, but I think and I can't stand him, but nevertheless, he's there. He was good, but 6 Super Bowls or whatever he has is a lot. What difference does it make? So, do you want to live in a universe without a God? And if people think about it, I don't think they're going to come up with a yes as an answer. They don't like the idea of having to answer to somebody, but ultimately, because then you're left with, and we're going to read these quotes again, the whole thing is pointless, absurd, pitiless, the universe and everything, and the fact that we have personality says something. And that screams another personality that bestowed that on us. And so we'll talk about that. Anyway, Saint Anselm, Ontological Argument. Any comments? Otherwise, I'm going to stop recording. No, guys don't say anything.